March 1945. The war was collapsing inward on itself, like a dying star. Germany's skies were no longer ruled by the Luftwaffe. They were hunted. Over the Rhine Valley, a Messerschmitt streaked low and wounded, trailing a thick ribbon of black smoke that smeared the pale spring sky. Inside the cockpit, Hans Werner Lurch knew the truth before the engine finally began to die. This was over. Not just the mission. Possibly his life. American fighters circled above him, patient and ruthless, like wolves that already knew their prey could not escape. Hans was 26 years old, one of the Luftwaffe's most experienced test pilots, a man who had pushed prototype fighters and jets to their limits. He had survived years of war, hundreds of dangerous flights, and now, in the final weeks of Germany's collapse, he was about to fall into enemy hands. What frightened him most was not the crash. It was what came after. For years, Nazi propaganda had drilled the same images into every German soldier's mind. Capture by the Americans meant torture, interrogation, execution, especially for pilots, especially for test pilots who knew secrets. Hans had heard the stories in mess halls and briefing rooms. American soldiers shooting Luftwaffe pilots on sight. Prisoners handed over to the Russians. Camps where men starved or were beaten for speaking German. He didn't believe all of it. He couldn't. But he had seen what happened to downed Allied airmen inside Germany. Some Wehrmacht units followed the rules. Others didn't. And the SS, everyone knew what they did. Allied pilots murdered simply for surviving the fall from the sky. If Germans could do that, why would Americans be any different? The altimeter needle spun down. 2,000 feet. 1,000. Smoke burned his eyes. Hydraulic fluid mixed with oil and fear. The fighter that hit him was gone, already radioing his position. Ground troops would be waiting. Hans's shoulder throbbed where shrapnel had torn through his cockpit. Blood soaked his flight suit, warm and sticky. His hands shook, not from fear of death, but from fear of survival. If he lived, he would suffer. 500 feet. Hans thought of his wife, Hildegard. Their daughter, only 3 years old. Would they even be told what happened to him? Or would he vanish into an American prison camp, another name lost to history? He reached for the canopy release. The canopy tore away in a blast of freezing air. The wind slammed into him, stealing his breath. He fought the G-forces, hauled himself upright, and threw his body into the void. The parachute snapped open violently, ripping a gasp of pain from his wounded shoulder. Below him, his Messerschmitt plowed into a farmer's field, erupting in earth and twisted metal. 4 years of war ended in smoke. As he drifted down, he saw them. Soldiers running. Jeeps bouncing across dirt roads. Rifles raised. This was it. Everything he had been warned about. Everything he feared. Hans hit the ground hard. Pain exploded through his shoulder. He collapsed into the dirt, gasping, tasting blood and soil. The parachute dragged him several meters before he managed to release it. The silk fell limp beside him like a white flag. Boots thundered closer. Hans forced himself to his knees, then to his feet. His left arm hung useless, blood dripping onto the grass. He raised his right hand slowly, palm open, the universal language of surrender. His mouth was too dry to speak. Even if he could, his English was useless. American soldiers emerged from the tree line. 5, maybe 6 of them. Infantry. Young. Dirty. Exhausted. Rifles trained on his chest. The sergeant at the front shouted something. Hans didn't understand the words, only the tone. His legs trembled. Hands searched him roughly, checking for weapons. They found none. Someone ripped the Iron Cross from his chest and pocketed it. Luftwaffe, the sergeant said. Hans tried to speak. Ich bin, he swayed. The world tilted. The sergeant studied him. The blood. The pallor. The way he barely remained upright. Something shifted in the man's expression. Not sympathy. Recognition. One soldier seeing another soldier who was about to fall. The sergeant lowered his rifle. Get the medic, he ordered. This one's hurt bad. That single sentence shattered everything Hans believed. A young medic rushed forward, barely 20, freckles across his face. He eased Hans down gently, cutting away the flight jacket, examining the wound with careful hands. No blows. No shouting. No rage. Damn, the medic muttered. You got chewed up. Morphine was injected into Hans's leg. The pain faded into a distant warmth. Bandages followed. Calm voices. Gentle hands. The sergeant lit a cigarette, then offered it to Hans. A cigarette. Hans took it with shaking fingers. Real tobacco. The sergeant cupped the flame for him against the wind like they were comrades sharing a break. What's your name? The sergeant asked slowly. Hans, he whispered. Well, Hans, the man said, you picked a hell of a day to fall out of the sky. War's almost over. They loaded him into a jeep. The ride blurred into drifting consciousness. Someone gave him water, wiping his chin when it spilled. Someone adjusted his blanket. Kindness layered upon kindness, each one harder to comprehend than the last. This was not what Goebbels promised. Hans woke in a real bed with clean white sheets. Sunlight through glass. American swing music playing softly nearby. A hospital. Clean. Orderly. Germans and Americans lying side by side, receiving the same care. A nurse spoke German. You were lucky, she said. You'll recover fully. Why? Hans asked. I am your enemy. She looked confused. Because you are wounded. That answer stayed with him for the rest of his life. Days passed. Good food. Coffee. Chocolate. Penicillin. No interrogation. No threats. Just treatment. When an American major finally came to speak with him, Hans braced himself. Instead, the man offered him work. Fly. Evaluate aircraft. Continue doing what he loved. The war was ending. Germany was finished. The Americans needed his expertise. Hans accepted. Weeks turned into months. He flew captured aircraft. Then American ones. The first time he flew a P-51 Mustang, he laughed out loud at its power. He understood, finally, why Germany had lost the skies. The men he once fought became colleagues. Then friends. They shared photos of wives and children. Hans showed his own. No one mocked him. No one sneered. Germany surrendered in May. Hans stayed. In time, the Americans offered him more than work. They offered him a future. Immigration. Safety. A chance to bring his family to America. Hildegard wrote back. Germany was ruins. They had nothing left. They came. Hans met them at an American airport. His daughter barely recognized him at first. Then she smiled. Papa. He flew for the U.S. Navy. Then NASA. He helped shape jet aviation for decades. He never forgot the moment in that muddy field when a sergeant chose compassion instead of revenge. Decades later, Hans would say the war taught him something simple and terrible and true. A nation's values are tested not by how it treats friends, but by how it treats enemies. Hans Werner Lurch expected to die in March 1945. Instead, he landed in America. And because of one decision made in 60 seconds, his life, and generations after him, were changed forever.